Okay, great. So we're live on YouTube now. I'm going to admit a few more people into the meeting, but yeah, whilst we do that, Elizabeth, nice to hear from you. I hear you're dialing all the way in from Kenya, so karibu. It's nice to have you back again. We had Elizabeth with us last year at the Climate Action Week talking about UN SDG climate action. Today, she's here to talk about UN SDG 15, which is life on land, and also, more importantly, how her work ties very closely into that. So, first and foremost, Elizabeth, welcome back. It's so nice to see you again. I hope the year's been treating you well. So I'll do a quick intro for most of the people who may not be so familiar with your work or who kind of come across you for the first time. So just a little bit of background, everyone. I came across Elizabeth's work almost a year and a half ago, and I was really inspired to see how immersed she was in the work of climate action, and especially the work that she had managed to do herself in communities around her in Kenya. That was really, really inspiring to see. So for those of you who don't know, Elizabeth Wathuti is is the founder of Green Generations Initiative. She founded that in 2016. So Green Generation Initiative, or GGI, as I call it, are committed to raising socially and environmentally responsible generations. So one of the things that I think was really unique about what the work that Elizabeth does is it's very focused on the youth and young people. And I think that climate action does have to involve young people because they're the generations who are effectively inheriting the planet that we all live on. So I was really, it really made me feel positive to see that, there was really interesting work that Elizabeth was doing. And she's going to kind of tell you a lot more about that. But one thing I really want to also shout out, which I think is so impressive in the work that she's done to date, is she's also a recipient of the Wangari Maathai Scholarship. And for those of you who don't know who Wangari Maathai is, I'll actually allow Elizabeth to share a little bit of that later on in our talk. But a lot of her work has very much centered around really taking action around preserving our environment. So, without further ado, welcome Elizabeth. And yeah, I'll kind of pass it over to you to just introduce yourself briefly to the audience.
Thank you so much, Nimisha, for yet another great opportunity to speak during this session, and also grateful to everyone who is joining us from all the platforms. So my name is Elizabeth Wathuti. I'm an environmentalist and a climate activist from Kenya, and I'm also the founder of Green Generation Initiative that nurtures young people to love nature and to be environmentally conscious at a young age, and also currently heading campaigns at Wangari Maathai Foundation. And beyond that, also championing a lot for green spaces protection through Daima Coalition for Green Spaces Protection. So that's briefly about myself, and I know we'll be having deeper discussions more about the work.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I can't wait to, kind of unpack all your experience, because I think it's one, so inspiring for people, young people, but more importantly, I think the things that you're doing actually matter a lot when we talk about climate action. So if we start from that point, what does climate action really mean to you? When you think about UN SDG 13, what does it mean for you as, who you are and the work you do?
I would say climate action really has got so many perspectives, and it begins with someone being able to identify a challenge around them that is actually leading to the climate crisis. And I have really greatly identified with the aspect of nature, because for so many challenges that we are facing today, it's because humanity has been at war with nature. And so having initiatives that focus on regenerating nature, or campaigns and programs that make sure that the remaining natural ecosystems continue to stay intact, or even having initiatives whereby people speak up and give their voices about the kind of future that they want to see. And in this case, it's technically the young people. So for me, climate action is just that, taking that step to do something about addressing the climate crisis right now. And of course, by addressing, the root causes and making sure that we are not just waiting for someone else to take the action, but we are doing it from the ground. And at the same time, we are not only focusing on individual responsibility, but also on the system change. And this is exactly where our voices as young people begin to count, where as much as we are focusing on regenerating nature on the ground, like programs like focusing on afforestation, for instance, we are also holding the leaders accountable and holding, corporations or people that continue to fuel some of these challenges like deforestation accountable. So I take it as a holistic approach where we look at all things that lead to the climate crisis, and then each and every person identifies a niche or something that they can take part in, and then they begin to tackle and address that problem, either using their voice or being on the ground to take the real action.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. And I think one of the great things about you is you use your voice and you take action. So tell us, or tell the audience a little bit more about how you came up with Green Generation Initiative, and also a little bit also about what has really, I guess, built this passion inside you to address this really big problem.
So my passion greatly has been inspired by where I come from, like my birthplace, and also greatly inspired as well by the late Professor Wangari Maathai, and I will really mention much more about her. I personally grew up in the most forested region in Kenya. If you come to Kenya, and I know you've been there, Nimisha, before, so like Nyeri is like the most forested region, and there are all these beautiful forests and the clean streams. So for me as a child, these were the memories that I still recall up to date. And one thing that really made me so much connected to the natural world, of course, was the trees. And there was this one particular stream that was flowing close to my home. I still talk about it every day today, which was called Gura River, because it's famous for having been the fastest flowing river in Africa. So this particular stream was like a place where you could go and connect to nature as a young girl. And there was also this particular hill where I actually got a chance to plant my first tree when I was 7. This is a hill I could directly see while seated in the classroom. And one point in time when I was really at some point in a way getting conscious about the environment, and of course when I discovered people like Wangari Maathai, I really wanted to go back to this hill and find out how my tree was doing, if it grew or not. So I remember getting there and finding so many logs and tree stumps, like just at the entrance of that hill, and it really broke my heart. I think I felt so angry at the same time, and I was so furious. Like I could not understand why nobody valued this hill that I thought was really beautiful, and it gave us all the fresh air, and it was a place that I always wanted to be in. So I would say this ecological grief is what made me angry, but then this anger did not stop at the anger. It also gave me a hunger to want to do something about challenges like deforestation. And that is why if someone asks me why trees, then that exactly is the reason why trees, because this is where I got this strong connection. And of course, I've also been greatly inspired by Professor Wangari Maathai. It also happens to have been her birthplace. And I think at this same time when I was planting my first tree when I was 7, she was the member of parliament in Nyeri by then. So she was really a great inspiration. And I loved everything that she ever did for the environment, her dedication and the sacrifices she made. And she said that she was not doing that for any other reason, but because she felt that it was the right thing to do, and because she was doing it for the future generations. So really, this whole inspiration is what I would say continue to now give me that natural call to action, to want to do something about the challenges around me. And that is why today I will always feel heartbroken if I go to a place and there are trees being fell down, or I go to a place and find a stream that is all polluted, because these are the things that really, I am a part of nature and nature is a part of me. And I feel that's the same way that the entire human race should be when it comes to the interactions with nature. So this really strong connection with nature, and it's the same culture that we are trying to cultivate into young people through Green Generation Initiative. And also this explains why Green Generation Initiative, because my vision was to make sure that we have more young people who have this same love and connection for nature at a young age, and also to make sure that we are able to create a generation of environmentally conscious individuals. Because I do believe that most of the challenges that the world is facing today, it's because a lot of people still do not care about how their actions are going to impact the next generations, partly because we've been disconnected with nature and partly because people just don't care. So how can we make sure that we create a generation of young people who are environmentally conscious? And this is also going to mean that we are not losing a generation, because we are nurturing them now. And of course, they will continue to lead action and lead change right now, because it's not about tomorrow's future. It's about creating the future right now. And if we have to address the climate crisis, then we have to begin right now and begin with the young people and make sure that we are not leaving anyone behind. So that exactly was why Green Generation Initiative, to make sure that young people are getting that same love for nature. And of course, along the way, I discovered that you cannot connect people to nature without them having an experience with nature. And it also explains why we started some programs like the Adopt a Tree campaign, to make sure that every child in every school will get an opportunity to plant and adopt a tree in the school compound. This is, of course, to continue making them love nature. And at the same time, because we realized that a lot of trees were being planted around the world, but many people did not care about how these trees were going to mature up to maturity. And our main thing was to make sure that at least there's a plan to make sure that we are not just planting trees, but we are growing trees for impact. And that is why this campaign really ended up being one of the key programs that we started at the initiative. And so we still continue to nurture more young people, while also establishing food forest, and also making sure that we're establishing a green school model that is holistic, and bringing together so many different components, like, waste management, components like food security, and components like, forestry, all in one structure, or all in one eco projects demonstration corner.
And I think that's so powerful as well, because a lot of people don't really understand how the, or like you said, they're so disconnected from this concept of how we're so dependent on nature that it almost feels like we have to rebuild in a way that serves us and everything else that's around us. So um, this is why I really love this project personally, because I think people don't really make the connection between what will happen when it comes to food security if we've depleted all the land around us, which is, I'm sure, what is also happening in a lot of parts of Kenya. I've personally seen it myself, where there's a lot of degradation of the land, and the first thing that suffers is not just the nature but also the sense of food security. So I think why your project is so unique is it brings all those elements together. So just based on the work you've done since 2016, and I think this is important for the audience to understand as well, right? Like, oftentimes we talk about tree planting or tree growing, but we rarely have the opportunity to reflect back on when we've actually started that kind of work. Where have we got to now, and what kind of successes or lessons you've learned along the way? So would you like to share a little bit of that, like how you've progressed over the years?
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many lessons to pick from, especially since this program started. And I do remember the first time we really wanted to make sure that every child would get a tree each. And I know the very first project and the very first event we did in a school was, I would call them the baby steps, because we really didn't have like enough tree seedlings that would be able to make sure that every child would get a seedling. And I remember we just had about 20 of them, and we get into a school and every child is so excited, and they're trying to like make sure that these trees are enough for all of them, but there are like too many of them. But really what this taught me was that we could see the energy that these young people were so enthusiastic. They really wanted to be a part of the solution, and they really wanted to participate. And there was also that energy that you could tell from the fact that they wanted to also learn what this tree is going to do to the school compound, and how they can make sure that this tree gets to grow at the end of the day. Because for me, I feel it's a strong connection. It's not just the tree, it's a strong connection, like it's nature and humanity being apart. And for this particular activity that we did, I remember we were also trying to pick up some lessons, because it's also about going to a school and also making sure that we know the right types of tree seedlings that need to be planted there. And we also need to make sure that we know if they have enough space, for example, and if they have enough space for how many tree seedlings, and also to make sure that we even get the number of the students so that this adopt a tree campaign will work, because the vision was to make sure that each and every child would get a tree to plant each. And then what we really learned in the process was also the power to work with a group in the school that we can raise and nurture. And that is when we started to establish environmental clubs. So we go to a school and we recruit young people who are really passionate and are willing to learn and be part of, you know, the team that continues to guide and lead the others in terms of conservation in their school. And then it was a process like beyond a one-day event. I know a lot of people do, you know, plant trees in a day and they will never go back there to find out how those trees are doing. For me, I have learned to view tree growing differently. It's not just a one-day event where you go and plant thousands of tree seedlings, you know, take photos, share, and that's it, you know, and it ends there. I feel it's a whole process that also involves educating the community and making sure that they feel empowered enough to also be a part of the process. So at times we even have to like visit a school in advance and run a series of environmental education programs so that the young children can understand why we are doing this in the at the same time. And after they understand, then it's when we form this environmental club. And the club also is not just formed. We have to keep doing this every other week, going back there to see if it's making an impact and a difference. And which really makes me value a lot the aspect of monitoring and evaluation for any environmental project right now, if at all it's being done for impact. And so this is where we also started to discover that there is something called survival rate for the tree seedlings, and it's also determined by a number of factors that we have to follow when we're doing these programs. And so I'm really proud that right now we've been able to cut across about 35 schools for this particular project. And the seedlings that we've been able to do are about over 30,000 tree seedlings. And we can actually also account for about 98% survival rate, because at the end of the day, when we go back to these schools, the children are loving what they're doing and they're taking good care of the trees. And we actually always wish we can do more. We can continue to reach more children and continue to grow more and more tree seedlings and continue to support the schools that we're already supporting right now. And I believe this is possible if, you know, we work together and, you know, have people who can actually also support projects like we are doing. And this actually would make us really, you know, maximize on the impacts that we're already doing right now. So I feel there's that whole process. And really, the great thing with the initiative is that we also have passionate volunteers and members who really continue to keep this work alive. And they continue to also, at some point, even adopt some of the schools, whereby we need to keep checking on the schools and keep checking on how the environmental club is doing, because at the end of the day, the children need to keep being nurtured so that they can continue to keep the projects alive in their schools.
Yeah, I think that that's also really important. I think it's, and I love that you raised that point about, it shouldn't be tree planting, it should be tree growing, because like you said, it's so easy to just, be part of a community day, go plant a few trees, take a few pictures, and then you never really know what has happened. So that it's so important that you raise that point. And I guess it also embeds that kind of culture in and amongst the teachers and all the parents and stuff like that. So you're really creating more of a movement, which is quite, it's quite nice. So when you then think about implementing some of the concepts you talked about with green schools and stuff like that, how has that been adopted? Or how do you plan to scale kind of just the adopt a tree campaign to something more holistic?
Great. So maybe to begin on that, I'm really proud to say that we actually tried out the first green school model in one of the schools in Nairobi.
Nice. Okay.
And it's one of the schools that we've been supporting. The school is called Kawandani Primary School. So it's one of the schools where we went at one point in time and did a tree planting. And of course, with our same system of making sure that the trees are being nurtured, we of course like signed a tree to every child. And then after some point, we were a bit disappointed because we found out that the trees had been eaten up by the goats around the school compound, because the school is not really well fenced, which also aligns some of the challenges that we face when trying to really green some of these schools. So we thought then that was the right place to begin this model, because we needed to do fence portion of the school compound where we would then incorporate some of the aspects that I'm highlighting, like the food forest and also the green fence. And actually in that particular school, we've actually left out a small space where it's a green park. So the children can go in and study in the same structure, and they can actually sit, because it's a portion that we've set aside as a park where they can find shade and shelter. And one surprising fact about this school is that before we got in there, there's only one tree, and it's just like close to one of the classrooms. And you can tell that it's a challenge when the children want to go out and it's sunny. So we really wanted to make an impact and make sure that we are changing the way in which these children have to learn every day, and create for them a conducive environment to study. So we just began by fencing out the space. We could, of course, have done more, like a bigger portion if we had like more support, but we just picked what we could, a really small portion, and then we fenced it out. Like the first thing we did was, plant trees all around the fence, and then we had to divide the portion. We had to divide it into like small portions to fit in the projects that I have mentioned, and one of them, of course, being the food forest. And for the food forest, the idea normally what we do is make sure that we are planting mixed species of fruit trees in one designated corner in the compound. And so for this particular one, it's a component in the model whereby we pick the fruit trees that would do so well. And of course, we also pick the ones that will grow really fast, because we don't want the trees to also, stay like 5 years before they start to produce fruits. So sometimes we try to also do the grafted fruit trees, although they can also be very expensive, but the best because they'll begin to yield fruits within a short period of time as compared to the others. And then we also pick the opposite corner of the food forest and do a kitchen garden, because at the end of the day, this is also all about food security and climate change adaptation. And food insecurity is one of the challenges that has really hit the African continent hard when it comes to, to climate change issues. And I know the people that still stand to be the most affected are children and women. So the best thing that we can do is to make sure that we are being a part of the solution. And that is why, on top of the food forest that continues to at least provide a nutritious source of food for the school compound, because our vision is to make sure that these trees at the end of the day will supplement the school's feeding program. We also add the kitchen garden, whereby now we are growing crops that also at some point, some of these public schools, they usually cook for the children, but it's also difficult to get like vegetables that they can use to cook for these children. So if these vegetables can be grown in the school compound, and remember, this is also a learning structure for the children. So they'll get the vegetables, they'll get to go there during the classroom hours and understand how to even grow healthy and nutritious food, and what this means for, like a climate action solution. And all of these things, it's just to bring about the nature-based solutions that we talk about every day, and to make sure that they are all incorporated in there. And also at the same time, trying to be a part of the solution in increasing the country's forest cover, because Kenya right now stands at about 7.3% forest cover, and this is below the 10% UN required minimum for every country. And so for me, it calls at least for every institution to also make sure that they have attained and surpassed the 10% forest cover. And if we are being a part of the solution towards that national goal as well, then that's how it also continues to add up to the overall goal of addressing the climate crisis. So that's part of just in a nutshell, the model. And it's a really exciting project that is really exciting, the students, because they're learning a lot. Every Thursday they have an activity to do, because for the clubs, we normally pick a day when we can visit the school and do an activity for them. So beyond the normal lessons where we just talk to them, now they're able to have a practical activity and experience in nature and in the models that they can do every day, and even be able to create more and more new things every day to continue improving the structure.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think it's one of the things that I have personally seen in Kenya whenever I've been there, that food security, which is quite ironic when, I guess for the benefit of those who are in London or globally who are listening, a lot of food in the UK is imported from Kenya. And so it's really interesting when you then look at these challenges, when you think about climate change, people like most of the citizens in England may not even be aware that so much of their fresh produce comes from Africa, and what does that mean for local communities there? And so I think projects like yours become so much more important because you're also teaching, I guess, communities around the school how to utilize or think of land in a different way, which is to sustain them you're starting to send all of this outside. So I think that's also a really, really important lesson for these kids to learn. um, so some of the like interesting questions that I personally had were, when you what are some of the challenges in or because all of course all of this is practical work, right? So sometimes it could be challenges related to logistics. It could be challenge, some of the ones you mentioned, which is just keeping the trees alive. But over for those of those in the UK or anywhere who are listening, who are probably not so familiar with Kenya, I am. What are some of the true challenges with delivering these kind of projects, just so that people can get a flavor of what you're really working against?
Yeah, so I would say one of the main challenges, and it's important to highlight that we're trying to impact public schools, and these are schools that almost don't have any support to do such projects. For example, it's not like the private schools. So our focus a lot has been on the public schools. And so some of these schools can also be located in places where we may not be able to easily access them. So there's that challenge also, of course, of logistics, being able to just get to a whole new place where we have identified that the school needs to be improved on, the school needs to have a green aspect, but then just being able to access the area is normally a huge problem, because you need, like, for example, means of transportation, not just for ourselves, but also for the tree seedlings, because you need to like move tree seedlings to one place to the other, and at some point the roads are inaccessible because these are schools that are in the interior places. And so I would say one of the hugest, of course, challenge has been the resources, like finances, to really be able to do some of these things. Because when you talk about the challenge of transportation, for example, the challenge of not having enough tree seedlings, I think all of these things are summed up to the fact that you need financial support to be able to scale up the project and be able to address some of these challenges. That also includes being able to scale it up. And like I've mentioned, like for the first model that we did, we would have really wanted to do a bigger portion, but then the bigger the portion, the more the resources that you need. And if you don't have that much of resources, then you're forced to just do the little that you can at that particular point in time. Because when it comes to the reception from the schools, we've had so really great reception from the schools. They really want these projects every day. In fact, I know of schools where if we don't show up for a week, they're calling us, where are you? Why are you not coming to speak to the children? What are they going to do today? So they really want to have all of these aspects in their schools. And at some points when we get to a school and we share this project with them, they're all excited and they ask us, where have we been all these years? So it's something that we really get a lot of positive response from the schools. So I think that would be the only challenge I can mention right now, because at the end of the day, it continues to sum up all the ones that I'm mentioning, including challenges to access these areas, and also the aspect of the fact that sometimes also when you're involving young people in some of these projects, you need to really involve them genuinely, and you need to really also be concerned about the fact that if you're asking someone to go to a specific region, how do they get there, how do they get back home? So there are all of these logistical aspects that continue to challenge in one or another. And I think all of this is summed up by the fact that when the resources are minimal, then you're not able to do much more. But if you have enough resources, then you're able to continue maximizing on the project. So and that's why every time I really mention a lot about climate action solutions like these, and I continue to urge people to continue investing in young people, invest in such projects, because at the end of the day, it's not about thinking about new solutions. Like, we have the solutions, we're trying to work on them on the ground with whatever we have. So if we only imagined how much of an impact we could have if this was scaled up, like how many more school children we could reach, like now we've already reached over 20,000. So how many more could we be able to reach within a span of a specific period of time? And then I believe that would be one of the best, steps that we can continue to take every time, to say that we are also, genuinely involving young people in, even in, supporting young people's climate action solutions as well. And, the nature-based solutions that we talk about every day.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think, I mean, I remember when I was growing up in Kenya, there was a lot of appetite, but there wasn't enough, I suppose, resources or knowledge or, those sorts of things to the right action to take. But like you said, now we know what all those solutions are. We know it's important now to just champion these sorts of projects. So I believe you have a question from one of your audience members. So just feel free to unmute yourself and then you can go ahead and ask the question.
Hi everyone. Thank you for this. My name is Bridget. Sorry, we're trying to find the right place to have this conversation. So my name is Bridget. I'm from Climate Story Lab Africa, and I have a couple of questions for Elizabeth. Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi, Bridget.
So my main concern is basically, I want to really big up you for the efforts that you're doing, trying to educate young people in schools about planting trees and climate action. But and it's very important that young people understand that the importance of having trees and having a balanced ecosystem and how trees contribute to biodiversity. But my question to you is, do you really make sure that these kids understand what climate action is? Because ever since I grew up, any topic to do with climate change, we were being urged to plant trees. And I've grown up to a level where I now understand that it is much bigger than planting trees. There's a lot that comes into play when you're talking about climate change. We have contributing factors, we have energy. 80% of homestays in our country still use biomass, they still use charcoal, they still use fuel, fossil fuels. And I know that very well because some of my family members still do that. So what are we really trying? Because we're trying to come from this narrative of just planting trees. We need climate action. We need people to be aware what is climate change. We need to demystify and understand when you're talking about climate change. Is it only but how is it affecting us? What is the African climate justice narrative? What are people doing it? Because kids need to grow up to understand that it is nice to have trees. It is nice to conserve the green spaces that we have, but what is really happening? And they need to be told that very early to understand that climate change, we are here. It's an emergency. It is happening. We're in the middle of a huge climate emergency. It is happening now. So that is my concern, and that is a very serious concern that I want you to maybe touch on. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think I'll just go ahead and respond. Yeah, so I think I'm not sure I had highlighted this, but on top of the groundwork that we are doing on regenerating nature, which is also part of the solutions that we talk about every day when it comes to like nature-based solutions, we also do the practical environmental education. And I think one thing that is really key on the way we do the practical environmental education is that we, in a way, establish a curriculum to make sure that we are having like 5 pillars. And I think I've highlighted 3 of them so far. And one of them is the forestry, there's wildlife, there's food security, water, and we also have climate change and waste management as part of that. And we actually have energy as well. So what we do is that the reason why we do these things on a weekly basis in the school is because we want to unpackage all of these aspects to the young children to make them understand what is happening. And of course, as well, not try to like, make it just theoretical, but also make it as practical as possible for them to also have that learning by experience at the same time. So what we do, for example, if we have the climate change pillar on one of the weekdays, this is when we will unpackage all the aspects that are happening about climate change. And we also get children to be creative, because Some of them are really young, and it all depends on what level they are in. So depending on what level they are in, we unpackage the information to them in a different way. And some can be creative, some can even, can even be in forms of artworks, what they write, like, even like stories and all that. And it all depends on the age that they are in. So we really unpackage this for them. And I know for most of them also, we've previously also participated in like climate strikes with some of the students that we work with in some of these schools. So we make sure that they understand what is happening right now, and not just understand what is happening, but we tend to dwell much more on how they can be a part of the solution, because most of them are so feeling overwhelmed every time. I think every time we have these climate change conversations with the children, and from their responses, there's a lot of them really feeling overwhelmed. There's that eco-anxiety of it that is happening in most of the schools. So try and change that perspective. How can they change, turn their reactions into action at the end of the day, so that it's not just feeling sad, feeling angry, or feeling overwhelmed about the situation, but feeling that they have some power in them to do something, even from the little project that they're doing in their school compound, and even from making sure that their voices count on a global perspective. So yeah, that's how we try to unpackage that for the schools. I hope
Thank
I've
you.
answered your question.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think you've said something very important, and that's very related to something that the project that we're doing, and it's kind of taking the topic of climate change and trying to communicate in a way that works best for us, in a way that we have incorporated African concepts, like maybe storytelling. Like Africans, we are very big on storytelling. We grew up, we were being told stories, and this is where we use art, we use illustrations, and that's a very big medium to communicate, telling people like it is happening. But what are some of the mediums that we can use to communicate? Because people are tired of this just posters. People are tired of seeing climate change. But what are some of the ways that we can do? So if you're using that way to communicate to young kids, because also very young kids, kids are very visual. Kids have a very great memory. So if you're incorporating the creative aspect to juggle their minds, to make them remember, that is a very, very good step towards climate action. And I think you're on the right track, and I'm very, very happy to be part of this conversation. And I don't have any more questions. And thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think one more thing that I would add, as well, is we one of the things I love about Elizabeth's project is that it focuses very much on it. So the entry point may be that you plant a tree or you adopt a tree, but typically that's kind of where it starts from. And when people, or when communities have that level of understanding, then they can be brought into a world that involves more work,
Absolutely,
cultivating all
absolutely,
of
absolutely.
um, the work that needs to be done. And I think your projects do focus very much on action as a whole encompassing idea. It's not just plant a tree and then forget about it. I
Yeah,
think you do.
absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And sorry to just cut and say this again, because we need to. I feel like we need to move away from the narrative of just planting trees is very important, very, very important, and it's the least of what somebody can do in the ground, because we need trees. Trees are good for biodiversity. Trees are good for their source of food, because as Elizabeth has said, we are also tackling issues to do with food insecurity in Africa. It's one of the challenges that actually top there with climate change, and 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 it's important, and I like that, and I like whatever she's doing. So I've just gotten distracted by somebody, but yeah, thank you. I'll mute, and I'll let you continue the conversation.
No, great. Thank you for your question. It's really nice. So we have another question from Anne Macharia, and she says, "My question is, what are some of the highlights of your work or your activism?" That's actually a really good question.
Great. So a few highlights. Well, that's a really great question. So I would say some of the few highlights, I think and perhaps it's a good question to respond also with what keeps me going at the same time. I think these are some of the highlights, and the fact that, you know, you can just step into a school and, you know, the children are all excited. They want to do so much for the environment within a day, and you keep longing to be back there for the next time, and you keep longing to meet more and more of these people. So I think also some of the highlights I would mention is the fact that we've really been able to do much within, you know, just I would say a short period of time and within limited resources. And this is one thing that can really continue to, you know, empower someone and, you know, make you believe that much more and more can be done. And of course, I've mentioned some of these, like the children who've impacted so far, the siblings we've been able to do, and the fact that there's that huge percentage of survival at the end of the day. And yeah, I think that's part of it. And then the other thing, of course, beyond all of this, there are highlights where we've also participated in some of the campaigns and really actually continued to prove the fact that activism works. And I would mention that along the way, we've continued to also do some campaigns that even focus on like protection of green spaces, instances where we've been out, and this is in general in terms of activism, instances when we've been out there to the streets to say that we want our green spaces protected and we want to have a balance between development and the green spaces, and actually in a way succeeded. And there are many instances where in activism you do many things, but you either end up having your efforts frustrated, or, you know, you just end up giving up at the end of the day. And I think one of the most recent highlight was an instance where we were, you know, trying to protect the trees in Nairobi city. And although there were challenges because most trees kept being cut down, we succeeded to like save the life of 100-year-old iconic fig tree that still continues to give everyone, you know, power that activism can actually work, because this particular tree got a presidential declaration to conserve it at the end of the day. And this was through a march. So it really shows that maybe people hear us, it's only that they don't listen to us, because if this particular instance something was done, then, you know, it shows that they listen to us, but more still needs to be done at the end of the day. And I think some of the other highlights is the fact that we still continue to see, you know, lots of people sharing, you know, our work, and people really want to connect, and even asking how can we, you know, have a similar model in our country, like even outside of Kenya. And so getting such impact stories from people, from children, from parents, really is some of, you know, it's part of the things that continue to keep all hope alive, and also continue to keep this work going, because at the end of the day, it's about the impact, it's about the people that are being inspired by this, and it's about the people that are continuing to change their communities through this. Because we also have so many instances of children who have gone through our program and they've completed school and gone ahead to their communities to start projects similar to what they learned when they were in school. So getting such impact stories that there's actually a journey that we are shaping from these young people, I think this is why we need to keep doing this and continue to do it even in a larger scale.
No, and I love that you mentioned that, because it's one of the reasons I thought it was so important for you specifically to come and talk about this topic, and especially to, you know, the audience, because, you know, sometimes people would ask me, but, you know, she's all the way in Kenya, like what are we going to learn from that? And I think that's also a kind of misconception around climate change, is that, you know, it doesn't just affect one region or one part of the world. This is something that affects all of us. And I think also there's something that we could all learn from the models that you've implemented to kind of get more green spaces, you know, anywhere in the world you live. So I think it's really, you know, I'm glad that you mentioned that highlight, because it's one of the things that I think I would love to highlight your work more for, that it's something we, you know, many people should emulate, because education, food security, climate change, these are all some of the biggest problems. And I think being able to address that with very young people from a young age through these sorts of initiatives are what really, really matters. So I'm going to go slightly off topic and just ask a few questions about you, Elizabeth, which is, you know, when you're not doing activism and when you're not planting trees, what do you do as just Elizabeth Like, do you just veg out, watch Netflix? Like, just tell us a little bit about you as a person.
Yeah, so when I'm not doing activism, I think one of the key things that I do most is I love adventures. So I travel a lot. I am one of these people who don't want to stay in one place. So the pandemic has affected me so much. So I want to get new experiences, walk to a nearest park or forest, or, just to learn new things. And I love to also learn a lot about other communities. So I would just travel to, different places and get to experience other people's cultures and, what's different. And I think something also really different and unique is that I also like to try out new things, and which also explains why I want to go to new places every day and learn new things, try out their food, their cultures, and just learn what's different from from the norms. And apart from that, I think it's more of the adventures and the walks. Of course, I also do movies, but not so much because I want to be outdoors a lot. So I think a whole bit of my life beyond activism is when I'm just, going out on adventures and just
Really
exploring.
enjoying nature.
Exactly.
Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
the same as well. It's where I'm my happiest, when I'm like in a forest or amongst trees. So I can totally resonate with what you're saying. Um, and so looking to the future now, what are your ambitions for one, your Green Generation Initiative, but also, how do you feel about climate change or climate action? And I know that's quite a loaded question because, like you said, right, or the speaker before you, which was, we're already in a climate emergency, but you're also, as an activist, quite close to seeing how things are changing. So I'd also be interested to hear your perspective on what are your hopes for the future in that area. So let's start with your initiative first.
Yes. So one of my hopes for the future is to, number one, be able to impact all the 47 counties in Kenya. I know right now we've been able to cut across like just 7 of them, but
Okay.
really one of the hopes is to make sure that we reach out to all the 47. And of course, reaching out to all the 47 counties in Kenya especially through this green school model, means reaching out to thousands of other young children and thousands of other community members, because this project also not only impacts the children, but also the surrounding communities are able to understand a lot of complex issues about the environment, about climate change, about energy, about waste management. So at the end of the day, it's about impacting a whole new generation through just one huge school project in one of the designated schools in one of the counties. And of course, being able to cut across all these 47 counties will mean more of a huge impact as well. And of course, it will also mean multiplication of of everything that we're trying to achieve right now. And of course, really looking to having that generation of environmentally conscious individuals, because at the end of the day, this is the whole reason why we are doing all this. We want to create a generation of environmentally conscious individuals through some of these projects. And I do really believe that this is possible, and even possible within a short period and span of time. And that's why I always love to keep connecting with new people, getting new ideas, and also, growing the network at Green Generation Initiative from the members and volunteers, and making sure that we all continue to work together to realize some of these hopes and dreams, because they're all possible. And then looking at the general climate conversations, I think the situation right now feels a bit overwhelming, because we are still seeing a lot of inequalities when it comes to how the climate crisis is being addressed, and also bringing as well the issues of vaccine inequalities. I know right now the ongoing conversations, for example, is around the COP26 that is happening in Glasgow, and supposed to happen in November, November towards December. But then there's still the aspect where countries like mine, we're still not certain about vaccination. And there has been conversations around virtual COPs, and of course we are saying that's not visible, it's not even possible in the first place. And I know all of these things continue to have uncertainty, and there's a lot of information that is not yet clear to everyone. And of course, even beyond the COP, we can see a lot of push that is coming from young people in terms of what we want to see. And the reason why all of this is happening is because every young person and every person, I would just say like every young person right now has got the kind of future and vision for their world, for their countries, for their continents that they envision. There's a kind of Kenya that I want to see in the next years. There's a kind of Africa I want to see in the next years. And if some of the things are not done right now, then it means that our visions are not going to be realized. And so we are only asking the leaders who have the capacity to do much, much more than we can do, and much, much more than we are doing right now, to also make sure that it's not just about leaving it to us. It's not just about the individual responsibility, but everyone has got a huge role to play. So right now, I think the feel is that there has been a lot of pledges and promises from the people in power, people who have got the biggest capacity to adapt. And then there's also lots of things that are happening that can be frustrating because, for example, we keep saying that we don't want to see any more investments into fossil fuels, and then we find countries that are, licensing new coal mines, and it's really continues to frustrate the effort of every young person who's trying to speak up today. And I think there's also the aspect of, we find also so much of the greenwashing, like people want to appear as though they're addressing the climate crisis, but at the end of the day, they are the problem and they don't want to actually admit that. So I think at the end of the day, it's making sure that we are all at the same page and making sure that everybody does what is supposed to be done right now. And maybe the biggest and the most challenging thing and frustration for every young person right now is that this action, yes, we appreciate the pledges, the promises and everything, but we want to see it happening right now, not, in 2030, 2050, because at the end of the day, the climate crisis still continue to affect so many people. I was in Samburu like 2 weeks, no, like almost like a month ago. And it kind of reminded me about how in the conversations around climate change, we talk about how women will be the most affected, forgetting that the will is not even supposed to be there. They are already being affected. And I remember one incident that really, broke my heart when I went to Samburu, because from a far distance, we just crossed a place that was supposed to be a bridge to a huge river, but then it was all dry. And, we actually realized that it was supposed to be a stream and it was dry. But then on the other end, there was like a woman with her 3 children. They seemed to be crying. And, I just got triggered. Like I like to, learn a lot about how people have to cope with all of these challenges. So I remember we walked to this woman, and she could not speak, Swahili. So we had to get someone who would speak in Samburu to translate for us. And, we were just asking her a few questions. But, what we found her doing is that she was hand digging a well to get water for her children. And when I went down to this hand dug well, I realized that the water was not even safe for consumption. And so it struck me because she had walked about 12 miles to just get to that place to dig a hole to find water, because that was supposed to be a stream that had dried a long time ago. And it reminded me of the fact that a lot of people feel as though the climate crisis is not happening because it's not happening where they are, forgetting that just because it's not happening where you are, it doesn't mean that it's not happening at all. It's already affecting so many people right now. And actually, a lot of people right now have to deal with both the COVID-19 pandemic and the climate crisis all at the same time. So it really calls for urgent action and also an acceleration of every effort that is happening right now, whether it's from young people, whether it's from women, whether it's from different countries, so that all of these efforts now combined together will continue to change the world for the better, and also will continue to make sure that we are really pushing for, the real action as well from our leaders, who can push for some of these policies and also who can even make more bigger, actions and steps beyond what is already happening. So I would say I would wish to see more when it comes to the systemic change and individual responsibility all at once. And we can never, ever separate the two of them. They have to continue happening at the same time. And everyone needs to feel involved, and everyone needs to also participate and be a part of the solution.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So you have two more questions before we wrap up. So one of them is, and I think you've touched on this a little bit, but they ask, why is it important for individuals and young people to be involved in climate action? And I think you kind of touched on that a little bit already.
Yes.
And
Okay.
do you have anything more you want to add to that?
I feel I have touched on that in my previous intervention.
Yeah.
Yeah, but just to mention that, and this is like, I'm tempted to mention a quote from Professor Ngare Mathai that really also drives me to action a lot. And most of us young people right now are really informed about the climate crisis, even beyond people who don't have access to technology and all that. We are the people who mostly have the technology. We get, the latest news updates and all that. We are the people that can reach out to our communities. And there's something that Professor Ngare Mathai always said, that those of us who understand, who feel strongly, must not tire, and we must not give up, because the burden is on us who know, because those who don't know are at peace, and it is us who know that get disturbed and are caused to take action. So that bit of, we have to turn our reactions into action. We cannot just be angry and frustrated about the world's inaction. We can use our voices, and that which makes us feel the burden, we need to lift that up and begin to take urgent action as young people, because this is about our future, and we're the ones who will have to live longer with the consequences of the world's inaction today, or the consequences of every wrong action and decision that is going to be made for us without us today. So we have to be a part of the solution and the process in climate action.
I think I agree with that.
I have a question. Sorry, I just have to come in. I'm sorry. Elizabeth, you're talking about systemic change, and you've spoken nicely about a woman in Samburu and whatever she's doing at community level to address the issues of climate change, and I really like that. I really like that, because change begins from the ground up. It's not the other way around, where we have people sitting in boardrooms and making executive decisions for issues that affect people who are on the low. But do we really need the support of our leaders? Do we really need, or we need to look at it differently? Because if everyone in the community can participate and be intentional and have information about what really needs to be done, because some of these issues affect us. I feel like when we are asking for our leaders to come in, for me, it just has never resonated for me at any point. And I know I'm coming from this I'm criticizing this very strongly. But if we empower people from the community level with the small resources that we have, that is where the systemic change that we are talking about that will happen. COP26 is amazing. COP26 is great. But we are going to sit down and listen to developed countries having solutions to their problems. But what is working for us here at home? What are some of the solutions? What are some of the things that we are doing here at home before we go and sit in COP26 and have these big meetings and whatnot? I love COP26 and it's great and it's the highlight of the year. Everybody's looking towards that. But what are we doing at community levels? Why do we always have to involve our leaders? Why is it always a conversation that we need support from our leaders? Why can't we just do something on our own? And that is, I think that's my point of concern, but it's a bone of contention and everybody will be like, I'm criticizing it. But I feel that if we are going to address the African issue of climate change, we really need to start doing our own. We really need to have to carve our own path. We really need to come with our own solutions to our own problems, because if we are looking at other things to come and help us, that I don't think that would work in my opinion.
Yeah, I think my best response to that is that people are already working on really great solutions on the ground, and it is the leaders who are actually failing us. People are already doing just so much on the ground, but at the end of the day, the people who still continue to fail us, of course, it's our leaders, because we cannot continue to, for example, make some of the huge decisions that are being made right now. It is our leaders who are responsible. And talking of instances like, when you talk about no investments into the fossil fuels anymore, who are giving the licenses, who are, opening up new coal mines every other time, it is our leaders. We might have the capacity to hold them accountable, but we do not have that capacity to, approve some of the things that they have the power to do. So if our leaders are not acting responsibly, then this also continues to undermine the efforts that are being done by people on the ground. Because at the end of the day, the people on the ground can be doing, for example, large-scale efforts to regenerate nature. But then on the other hand, our leaders are approving projects that continue to destroy some of the parcels and large parcels of land that have been regenerated for years by communities. So at the end of the day, it has to be an aspect of making sure that we are holding them accountable, and also making sure that we continue to tell the real climate stories, because we hear a lot about the challenges in Africa, but most of the projects that are being done right now, and I can tell they're massive projects because I have really seen most of them in every time that I'm, interacting with communities. People are doing so much great work on the ground. Communities, women, they have come together to do all of these aspects. And even from Africa, even on an overall Africa perspective, projects like the Great Green Wall, they are being done by communities. But these efforts will be undermined at the end of the day if the readers will not act responsibly. So maybe just that's what I can say. And I don't know if Nimisha, you have another question for me.
Yes, I do. So, and I think just one thing I would also add to that concept of leadership, just from my own experience, because I work with those sorts of people. I think you need both sides. I think it's a bit. I think we're living in a life with rose tinted glasses if you tell yourself, well, we in our community are enough to do what is needed to be done. I think you need both sides of it. And it's exactly the points you raised, right? Like if you're putting all your effort into reforesting one part of Kenya, and then your government's approving licenses to put up a coal mine just down, further down, what was the effort worth? So I think systemic change is really important. Having leaders who understand the importance of what we need to do is equally important. And having that debate and dialogue, they're never going to get it right. I think sometimes people live in this world where it's easy to criticize leaders and presidents and politicians and all these people who make decisions on behalf of us. But at the same time, you'll often find, because of the job that they do, they're not as connected to what goes on in the community. So, like you said, whatever needs to be done in the community should be championed by those of you who are in there, but that doesn't take away the need for those people who make decisions at such a big level to also be part of the change. So, you have one more question, which is kind of tied to what we've been talking about. So, it says, in activism, what's the recommendation on balance between infrastructural development and conservation? The major contributors of the climate crisis being urbanization and development. And in addition to that, efforts in ensuring policy. So, for example, in physical planning, put in considerations to the environment or conservation. So, they're basically asking, where is the balance in that?
Yeah, so this has been really visible in cities. And I think this COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted some of the challenges we are facing in our cities, that if we don't create green, clean, and resilient cities, then it's going to be challenging for urban dwellers or people who don't even live close to the cities, because what we are seeing every day is a rise in development, infrastructure development projects on large scale that continue to undermine, like the green spaces, for instance. We are finding cities that have diminishing green spaces. And if you find out why the green spaces are diminishing, it's because of road expansions, new buildings are coming up. So there's all of these aspects happening, forgetting that we need to develop in a manner that puts people and our planet above the profits. And I would say what needs to be done is that we need to prioritize the green spaces, for example, when it comes to any development. And we can never say that we are sacrificing them for anything at the end of the day. Because if we are putting up roads, for example, that will not be able to benefit the bigger population, for example, of people, or putting up roads that are there to create more space for cars, then it's not sustainable, because this is also an increase in emissions. And at the end of the day, if we are putting up roads and, cutting down trees aimlessly just to give more space, for more roads, then it means that there's no balance that we're trying to strike at the end of the day. And this really highlights also what's happening in Nairobi, where we are seeing a lot of these expansions happening. And a good example is with the Nairobi Expressway that is currently under construction. And this is an expressway that is supposed to create room for cars, and mostly private cars, because there's going to be a toll fee to use this particular road. But if you look at the number of trees that have so far been felled and destroyed to just create that highway, and it's not even a highway that is going to benefit the about 90% of the population that have to either take public transportation or walk to work or walk to town. Because at the end of the day, if we prioritize on green spaces, and green spaces is not just about the trees, it's also about the fact that I can walk peacefully within the town and not be worried about getting hit down by a car, that I can cycle to the city and back, because we don't need to, always heavily depend on, heavily always invest in creating room for cars, for example. It has to be sustainable in that green, clean, and resilient cities consider the non-motorized transportation as well. So we cannot just be investing in infrastructure development and not giving consideration for the non-motorized transportation, because this is what at the end of the day is going to determine the aspect of even the air quality in the city, the emissions that we get from the industries and even the cars. There's so much traffic, for example, right now in Nairobi, and more roads are not going to help is the traffic congestion in any way. But if we focus on non-motorized transportation, and this is where we even strike that balance between, the people need the green spaces, people need more park spaces. But if we also are constructing roads and eating up into the parks, the small parks that have, the only little ones that have been left within the city, then we are not going to be striking that balance. So for me, I would say the best way to strike that balance is to consider and make sure that every project right now puts people and our planet above profits. And of course, that all the right measures are taken, because some of these projects, after they're approved, you find that their environmental impact assessment reports did not even follow the right procedures. So it's also about the legal system and, support and solidarity from the legal system, and is about how we communicate and about how we also make sure that we put into advocacy to make sure that we are, we are striking that balance between development and our green spaces.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Thank you very much, Nimisha, for allowing me to just say this. And Liz, I love that you've talked about communication, and communication is one of the most important aspects when we're talking about climate change. Because how do we communicate? People get the message. And just to wrap it up and say, for Liz, I understand your advocacy work and I appreciate that. But unless we adopt a people-centered climate action, all these things that we're talking about will still be a problem, because people need to be part of this. People need to come up and say what they want. People need to be part of this, and it's really happening. So if you're not going to do this, it's not going to work forward, because that's what I think. And it's good that you're involved in the ground, that you're talking to kids, because we need kids to be part of this. We need everyone. We need the generation to be part of this. But unless we take it from the community level, unless we allow people to say what they think about this issue, unless we allow people to speak their thoughts, I think the issue of climate change is still going to remain a myth. And I'm going to leave it at that. And I would urge everyone that is listening to this conversation to check out Climate Story Lab Africa. We will be having these awesome conversations. We will be talking about climate change. We will be demystifying some of the biggest issues, some of the biggest jargons. We will be making people understand when we're talking about climate change, what is it? So please check out Climate Story Lab Africa to have more information. And we're going to have a virtual event on the 8th and 9th of July. That's going to be in a week's time. And we're going to have amazing panel discussions that will touch on the issues of energy, the issues of climate finance, stakeholder intersectionality, and it would be great. So if Nimisha, you'd allow me, I would just provide a small link. Maybe some of the listeners would want to be part of this conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And I'm just conscious of time. So Elizabeth, any sort of final thoughts from you or final messages you want to give to the audience?
Yes, so I would want to leave everyone with a message to always remember that while we may all be in the same storm when it comes to the challenges we're talking about, we're definitely not in the same boat. And if we recognize the inequalities that exist and begin to make sure that we are being a part of the solution and not being a part of the challenge, then that's the best thing that we can continue to impact the next generations. And really also hoping that we all continue to be conscious and mindful about how we leave this planet for the next generations. And remember that we have to put people in our planet above profits, because at the end of the day, it is about making sure that this planet and world is livable and has a safe future for all generations to come. And these future generations conversations can never continue to make sense without the young people in the picture. So it has to be the young people, and not just hearing them but listening to them, and also making sure that everything that we are doing right now impacts this planet positively. And also remember that we need to reconnect with nature, because this war with nature still continues to impact some of the things that we are talking about today. So the best thing that we can do right now is to make sure that we are reconnecting back with the natural world, and remember that every effort counts and no action is too small for someone to take part in, because all those small acts multiplied by the millions of us will continue to make a difference at the end of the day. And it is all about, and for every young person who's listening to me, it's important to identify your niche. What is it that you feel challenged about? What is it that you feel burdened about? And like I shared with you about my challenge, that I really identified a lot with deforestation because I have faced the ecological grief as a child through deforestation. So what is it that you want to focus on when it comes to climate action? Because we cannot do everything, but with the little that we can do, that should give us hope for the future and should not make us, there's a lot of feelings about feeling overwhelmed about climate change, but there's something that each and every one of us can do to contribute, and that in itself is important and is enough, as long as you're doing something and not just waiting for other people to do something. As long as you are doing what you are supposed to do and you are changing your communities and the society, that in itself is what is going to help us change the world altogether.
I couldn't agree more. Elizabeth, I want to say thank you so much for participating in this Climate Action Week. And I'm just looking forward to working with you more on some of these school projects. So thank you so much for sharing your voice, and looking forward to having another discussion like this in the near future. All right.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, Tisha.